Get out of this seat right now. You don't belong here. Evelyn Brooks's cold voice tore through the luxury of first class, freezing the atmosphere in an instant. Passengers held their breath, eyes shifting toward the woman being targeted. Clara Mitchell, dressed in a navy blue suit, pearl earrings glinting softly under the cabin lights. Clara did not move. Her hand rested lightly on the armrest, her gaze steady, as if the words had never touched her. While the cabin drowned in uneasy silence, Evelyn stood tall, her eyes burning with disdain. The rumble of engines, the mingling scents of leather seats and expensive perfume, all faded beneath the harsh echo of a single command. "Stand up, now!" A few passengers exchanged nervous glances. A middle-aged man folded his newspaper but said nothing. A young couple cut their conversation short, watching in silence. A teenager in the back row pretended to scroll his phone, but his camera was quietly recording every second. Clara slowly turned her head, her eyes clear as winter glass. She held out her boarding pass, her voice calm and measured. "I believe this is my seat." Evelyn barely glanced at it, dismissing her with a flick of her hand as though brushing away dust. "This seat is reserved. If you don't move to the back, I'll call security." The words cut like a blade, leaving an invisible scar across the tense silence. In the row behind, Maya Carter, a young black woman, clutched her phone tighter, her heart pounding as instinct told her something important was about to happen. At that very moment, the sound of luggage hitting the overhead compartment broke the air. A man strode in, Richard Langston, a 52-year-old businessman, in a sharp grey three-piece suit, his eyes radiating arrogance. He stopped, glaring at Clara in what he considered his familiar seat. His voice lashed out like a whip. "What the hell is this? That's my seat. I've demanded this spot for years." The cabin erupted with tension, spreading fast and hot like fire to dry grass. Evelyn instantly shifted her demeanor, bowing like a servant. "I know, Mr. Langston. I'm handling it. Some people just don't understand the rules." Richard scoffed, turning toward Clara with a look of contempt. "First class isn't for just anyone. Standards mean something. Or do we let lottery winners sit here now?" Several passengers shifted uneasily, lips pressed tight, their discomfort visible but unspoken. Clara remained still, hands folded, breathing slow and steady. She had faced moments like this countless times in her life. Calm, but not weak. Silent, but not defeated. Her composure only fueled Evelyn's rage. Evelyn's teeth clenched, her voice sharp with hate. "You heard me. This seat isn't for you. Get out or I'll have you escorted." Richard slid into the seat beside Clara, smirking as he buttoned his jacket, savoring his false triumph. Meanwhile, Maya's trembling hands held the camera steady, her instinct telling her this scene would not be forgotten. Elsewhere, an elderly couple whispered, "This isn't right," but then fell silent like the rest. The VIP cabin thickened with tension, every breath heavy as steel. And then something remarkable happened. Clara did not fight back. She didn't shout, didn't stand, didn't yield. She simply sat, eyes distant, as though her entire life had led to this moment. Beneath her calm exterior lay a past forged in hardship, a childhood in working, class neighborhoods, nights spent studying under dim light, years of being underestimated and pushed aside for her gender and her skin. All of it had carved the steel within her. Evelyn didn't know that. Richard didn't know that. Nor did the passengers around her, but the truth was simple. The woman they dismissed as an ordinary passenger was in fact the true owner of this aircraft. That truth lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Clara pressed her lips together, holding the boarding pass firmly. In the suffocating silence, the entire cabin waited, breathless, for the answer to a single question. Would she rise in humiliation, or make the entire world bow before her? The engines roared as the plane prepared to leave the runway, but inside first class, the tension was stretched thin like a wire ready to snap. Evelyn Brooks stood blocking the seat, her chest heaving with fury. Richard Langston leaned back, arms crossed, his smirk radiating triumph. Clara Mitchell remained seated, her calm gaze steady, like a mountain in a storm. She did not need to shout. She did not need to explain. Her mere presence alone was enough to make Evelyn feel challenged. "You are disrupting the order of this flight," Evelyn hissed, her shrill voice cutting into the ears of every passenger. "If you don't cooperate, I'll have security take you off." A stifled breath escaped from the back row. Maya Carter, her hands trembling but steady on her phone, continued to record everything. Every insult, every contemptuous gesture was captured through her lens. Anger churned in her chest. Why wasn't anyone standing up? Why was everyone silent? An elderly man in the front whispered to his wife, "This isn't right." His wife gripped his hand tightly, her eyes pleading, "Stay quiet. We shouldn't get involved." The silence of the crowd echoed like a sentence. No one had the courage to break it. Clara raised her chin, her voice steady and clear. "Is there an issue with my boarding pass?" She held out the ticket again. Evelyn glanced quickly, then let out a mocking laugh, her eyes flashing with disdain. "I don't care what your ticket says. This is the VIP cabin, and you clearly don't belong here." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Even those pretending to read or scroll their phones couldn't hide their reaction. That statement was not just rejection, it was a verdict dripping with prejudice. Richard Langston chuckled, his laughter sharp as a razor. "Finally, someone dares to say what we all think. First class isn't for just anyone who can buy a ticket. There must be standards." But no one agreed. Eyes flickered nervously between passengers, unease spreading. Deep down, they knew Langston and Evelyn had gone too far. Clara sat tall, unmoving. Her silence was a mirror, reflecting the true nature of those around her. The calmer she remained, the louder Evelyn shrieked. The more composed she was, the harsher Langston's scorn became. A ding echoed. Evelyn had pressed the button for security. "Fine," she snapped loudly, her voice seething. "We'll do this the hard way." Two security officers appeared. The first, Officer Ramirez, young and eager, his eyes burning with the chance to assert power. The second, Officer Collins, older, his deep eyes revealing hesitation. Ramirez stepped forward, his tone clipped. "Ma'am, either move voluntarily or we'll be forced to escort you." Collins looked around the cabin, then glanced at Clara. He saw something in her eyes, not defiance, but a strength he couldn't explain. Lowering his voice, he asked cautiously, "Is there some kind of mistake here?" Evelyn cut in instantly. Absolutely not. She's been disruptive from the start, refusing to comply, disturbing passengers. The lie slipped out smoothly, as though Evelyn had rehearsed it her whole life. But those seated nearby knew the truth. They had seen Clara remain calm. They had heard every humiliation. They knew Evelyn was fabricating a story to justify her authority. Maya swallowed hard, her heart thundering. She wanted to shout, "Don't believe her!" But fear tightened her throat. Instead, she gripped her phone and recorded every second. Ramirez stepped closer, his voice firm. "We don't have time. You have 3 seconds to stand." Clara turned her head, her serene eyes locking on his. Her voice was not loud, yet it resonated through the cabin. "What crime am I being accused of?" A simple question, but it tore apart the false narrative. Evelyn froze, her face flushing red. Richard faltered, his smirk vanishing. Ramirez frowned, stammering. Only Collins, the seasoned officer, stared at Clara with growing realization, sensing something far beyond his grasp. The VIP cabin fell into silence. No one could answer. In that silence, clarity emerged. This was no longer about a seat. It was about power abused, prejudice masquerading as protocol. Evelyn inhaled sharply, her voice shaking but still hard. "We are not arguing. You must leave. Now." Richard chimed in, his tone dripping with contempt. "Exactly. This is about standards. We can't let just anyone think they have the right to sit beside us." Clara said nothing, but her silence was not surrender. It was anticipation, like a sword unsheathed but not yet swung. Maya's hands trembled. She didn't know who this woman truly was, but instinct screamed that Clara Mitchell was no ordinary passenger. She carried something, a secret strong enough to turn the tide, and then everything hung suspended in a fragile moment. The plane prepared for takeoff. Security stood ready. Evelyn and Richard basked in what they believed was certain victory. But they had no idea. They had just provoked a ticking time bomb. A time bomb named Clara Mitchell. Silence blanketed the VIP cabin like a thick sheet of ice. Evelyn Brooks stood tall, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Richard Langston leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, his smug smile spreading wide as if victory already belonged to him. Officer Ramirez squared his shoulders, ready to use force. Only Officer Collins hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Clara Mitchell again and again, as though sensing she was not an ordinary woman. Clara sat upright, her posture unshaken. She did not resist. She did not argue. Her calmness shone like a light in a dark room, making those who shouted seem suddenly small. She lowered her gaze to the leather bag on her lap, slowly unfastening the clasp. The soft click made several passengers flinch. Richard burst out laughing with mockery. "What are you going to do? Call your boyfriend to save you?" Evelyn sneered, her voice cutting. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want. No one can change this." But Clara did not answer. She pulled out her phone, her hand steady, and dialed a single number, pressing each digit with slow certainty, as though they had been engraved into her memory. As she lifted the phone to her ear, the air seemed to stop. Even the engine's roar faded to the background. "This is Clara," she said evenly, her tone neither high nor low. "Cancel all contracts with Langston. Emergency meeting Monday morning. I'll explain then." 10 words. Just 10 words. The first-class cabin exploded with shock. Passengers stared at each other, mouths hanging open. Evelyn blinked rapidly, her face stiffening. But the most violent reaction came from Richard Langston. His face drained of color. His smirk vanished. He sat up straight, stammering. "Wait. What did you just say? Cancel the contracts?" In that instant, everything snapped into place in his mind. The name, Clara Mitchell. One he had seen on contracts, one he had heard whispered in closed door meetings. Mitchell Aerospace Global, the company that operated the fleet of luxury jets he so proudly claimed as his domain. His eyes widened with terror. No, it can't be." Ramirez froze, his hand suspended mid-air. Colin's eyes widened, pieces of the truth falling into place. Maya Carter, still clutching her phone, felt her heart nearly leap out of her chest. She whispered under her breath, "Oh my God, it's her." Evelyn had yet to understand. She forced a shaky laugh, but her confidence faltered. "Ridiculous. Who do you think you are to give orders like that? Some woman in the wrong seat, claiming to cancel Langston's contracts. Don't be absurd." The cabin door opened. Captain Adrian Lee stepped in with a clipboard, prepared for a routine check. But when his eyes landed on Clara, he froze. His stern expression shifted instantly. He recognized her at once. This was the woman who appeared in every internal bulletin. The CEO, the founder, the ultimate authority of Mitchell Aerospace Global. The air tightened, like a balloon stretched to the point of bursting. Captain Lee lowered the clipboard, stepping forward, his voice carrying across the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce, this is Clara Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer of Mitchell Aerospace Global." The cabin erupted. Gasps, murmurs, frantic whispers filled the air. Some passengers covered their mouths, others sat frozen. Maya whispered again, her voice trembling. "The CEO, she's the CEO." Richard Langston collapsed into himself, his arrogance gone, his voice trembling. "Clara, I'm sorry. Perhaps we can discuss this. I didn't know." But Clara gave no reply. Her eyes met his, cold, calm, unyielding. With that single look, Richard understood. It was over. Evelyn's face went pale as the memory of every insult, every dismissive gesture replayed in her mind like a slow motion reel. She had just tried to drive the CEO of the airline from her own seat. Ramirez dropped his gaze, pulling his hand back in shame. Collins exhaled in relief, grateful he had not acted recklessly. Clara rose to her feet. She did not need to shout. She did not need to justify herself. The truth of her identity thundered louder than any threat could. In that moment, everyone understood her silence had never been weakness. It was power, a kind of power that made others tremble without a single word. Richard bowed his head, stammering, "Please give me one more chance. I've been a loyal client for years. I can make this right." But the answer had already been sealed in the 10 words Clara spoke over the phone. His chance was gone. Evelyn shook as she tried to speak. I didn't know. If I had known you were—" Clara raised her hand gently. The gesture was final, leaving no room for excuses, and silence fell again, this time heavy with judgment. She turned toward Maya, her eyes softening. A small smile flickered across her face, as if to say, "Thank you for not looking away." Around them, the cabin remained frozen, hearts pounding. Everyone knew they had just witnessed history. A moment when a woman dismissed and humiliated overturned everything with the sheer force of truth and authority. And as Clara sat back down, quiet as if no storm had ever raged, all understood one thing clearly. The game of power had changed forever. The engines roared as the jet cut through the clouds, but inside the VIP cabin no one cared about altitude or speed. Every eye was fixed on the woman standing tall in her navy blue suit, Clara Mitchell. She needed no more words, for her name and the truth of her identity had already turned the cabin into a courtroom without a judge. Evelyn Brooks was frozen, her trembling fingers clutching the service tray until they turned white. Every arrogant remark, every cold command she had spat out moments ago became a noose tightening around her own neck. She knew her 12-year career was likely ending in this very moment. Richard Langston slumped in his seat, sweat pouring down his forehead. Status, wealth, the handshakes of the elite that once made him proud, now meant nothing. In his mind, $1 million contracts and private luxury flights crumbled to dust, undone by the 10 words Clara had spoken on the phone. Clara sat back down, her movement gentle, but the entire cabin felt as though they had just witnessed a final verdict. Every breath she took carried authority, forcing silence upon all. Officer Ramirez bowed his head, swallowing hard, the aggression he had displayed minutes earlier now absurd. Officer Collins exhaled quietly, his eyes reflecting gratitude for having stopped himself before making the wrong move. The captain's voice came over the speaker, announcing the plane's descent into JFK, but the first-class cabin was cloaked in an unusual silence. No one flipped through a magazine. No one touched their wine. They sat motionless, their eyes on Clara, as if she were the axis around which the entire space revolved. The luxury jet touched down, tires screeching against the runway. As it slowed, what began as a routine journey had become an earthquake, and judgment began the moment the cabin doors opened. Evelyn was the first to leave. 2 airline managers stepped in and asked for her badge. Her steps were heavy, dragging her past behind her. A few passengers shook their heads. Some whispered, "I'm not surprised." The pride that once made Evelyn arrogant was gone, leaving only a bent back and a pale face. Richard followed. He tried to cling to dignity, but his steps trembled. His lips repeated over and over, "Clara, we can negotiate. I have been loyal to this airline for years." But Clara did not answer. Her brief command, "Cancel Langston's contracts," had already sealed his fate. Richard exited the plane carrying the collapse of a reputation he once thought untouchable. Ramirez was also stopped. The head of airline security approached and said simply, "You are no longer fit for this team." He hung his head, recalling the disdainful look he had given Clara, realizing he had erased his own career in a single moment. In contrast, Collins was called back by Clara. She looked him in the eye. You knew when to stop when you saw something was wrong. That instinct is exactly what we need in those who protect our passengers. Collins bowed slightly, his throat tight, knowing he had been pulled back from the edge and even trusted with a greater role. Captain Adrian Lee, the man who had recognized her in the cabin, was also retained. In the VIP lounge after the flight, before a small group of observing passengers, Clara declared, "From today, Captain Lee will oversee cultural training and operational supervision. I want this company's values not just in reports, but in every action of our crew." The room fell silent, then erupted into sparse but sincere applause. That crowd learned a lesson. Silence is not always safety. It can turn you into an unwilling witness to injustice. And Clara, by revealing the truth right there on the plane, forced everyone to look at themselves. In the corner, Maya Carter still held her phone. The video she had recorded from start to finish was now undeniable evidence. When Clara approached, Maya nervously lowered it, but Clara only smiled. "Thank you for having the courage to record the truth. Not everyone would have done it." Maya's eyes welled with tears. She had never imagined such a small act could be acknowledged by the CEO herself. Outside, the New York sky burned red with the late afternoon sun. The city had no idea that inside the first-class cabin of a flight that had just landed, the balance of power had been overturned. A flight attendant who once gloated had lost everything. A powerful investor had just seen his contracts erased. And a C, once dismissed because of appearances, had proven that dignity is not something to be bargained. The flight was over, but its aftershocks had only just begun. Just hours after the plane touched down at JFK, social media began to quake. A 15-minute video secretly recorded by Maya Carter inside the VIP cabin appeared on Twitter with the caption, "When even the CEO of the airline is disrespected because of skin color and prejudice." Within an hour, the video had over 500,000 views. By midnight, the number had surpassed 5 million. Comments poured in like a flood. "Unbelievable this is happening in 2025. Clara Mitchell's composure gave me chills. This is real leadership. Evelyn and Langston destroyed themselves with arrogance. Major news outlets picked up the story, from CNN to BBC, from the New York Times to The Guardian. Headlines spread everywhere. Black CEO humiliated on her own airline. 10 words that crushed an investor in seconds. News broadcasts echoed around the world, Clara's face appearing on every screen. The image of her sitting calm in the storm of prejudice became a symbol, spreading like an unstoppable fire. In Chicago, where Clara was born, entire neighborhoods buzzed with pride. People pointed at their phone screens, eyes shining. "She's one of ours. She did what we've always dreamed of." Aviation associations convened emergency meetings, demanding a full review of recruitment and crew training procedures. Urgent midnight emails read, "We cannot let this happen again." Meanwhile, those who stayed silent on the flight began to speak up. One passenger posted, "I was there. I stayed silent. Now I regret it. Clara Mitchell showed me that silence in the face of injustice is complicity." That confession was shared hundreds of thousands of times, becoming a mirror for others to confront their own fear. Richard Langston plummeted from the heights of power into free fall. Long-time partners cut ties immediately. His phone rang non-stop, not with deals but with cancellations. Images of him sneering in first class spread everywhere, making him the face of arrogance. Evelyn Brooks was not spared. Reporters uncovered past complaints of rudeness from passengers. The public condemned her. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. Her name became toxic in the industry, her career permanently shut down. In contrast, Officer Collins was praised as a symbol of restraint. He trusted his instincts and avoided a terrible mistake. The company promoted him into a new training role in airline security, turning his caution into a living lesson for future generations. Captain Adrian Lee was also interviewed. He said simply on live television, "When I saw Clara Mitchell, I didn't just see a CEO, I saw integrity. And that reminded me of the true responsibility of leadership." His words were quoted thousands of times, and Maya Carter, the 26-year-old who filmed it all, became a new face of courage. Clara personally invited her to intern in Mitchell Aerospace Global's Diversity and Inclusion Division. When the news broke, Maya cried on a live stream. "I only wanted to capture the truth. I never thought it would change my life." The incident grew into an earthquake. Rival airlines were forced to review their policies. A European airline CEO declared, "This moment will be written into history books. It forces us all to change." Business schools adopted the case as a study. The power of leadership in crisis. Lawyers debated its legal ramifications. On television, commentators called it the Clara Mitchell incident, an event redefining the entire airline industry. Amid the storm, Clara made no posts and gave no interviews. She appeared 3 days later at a brief press conference. Standing before dozens of microphones and flashing cameras, she spoke slowly. "Dignity is not a privilege, it is a right, and if we forget that, we will pay the price." With that single sentence, the room erupted in a standing ovation. The story no longer belonged solely to aviation. Tech firms, financial institutions, and service companies began discussing the Mitchell effect, the idea that a leader's calm can overturn injustice. Forums asked, "What would you have done in that VIP cabin? Stay silent or stand up?" Hashtags nudged respect. Right? Mitchell effect. Hashtag 10 words spread across every platform. And something rare happened. Millions of people around the world united in sharing the same message. Dignity is not negotiable. The flight had landed, but its aftershocks soared far beyond America's skies, echoing across the globe. 6 months after the Mitchell incident, the airline industry was still reeling. Yet while many companies scrambled to patch up their image, Clara Mitchell turned the scandal into a springboard to propel her company even further. At the headquarters of Mitchell Aerospace Global in New York, the grand hall glittered under the lights. More than 1,000 employees from branches around the world gathered, awaiting a speech they knew would go down in history. Clara stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. She was not dressed in her familiar navy blue suit, but in a simple white blouse. Her gaze swept across the hall, meeting every face, from maintenance engineers to pilots, from receptionists to regional directors. She began, her voice clear, each word striking like a drumbeat against the heart. That day, on a flight from London to New York, I witnessed firsthand what we have always feared to admit. Prejudice still exists, creeping into the smallest details, even within the very cabin of our own aircraft. The hall fell silent. But I also witnessed something else. I saw the courage of a young passenger who recorded the truth. I saw the restraint of a security officer who refused to follow blindly. I saw the integrity of a captain who revealed my identity to stop an injustice, and I realized we can do more. Applause erupted, but Clara raised her hand, calling for quiet. Mitchell Aerospace Global cannot be just a luxury airline. From now on, we will be a company that places human dignity at its core. Not only on paper, not only in advertisements, but in every flight, every service, every moment a passenger steps onto our aircraft. A massive screen lit up behind her. The company logo appeared alongside 3 bold words: dignity, trust, excellence. Clara unveiled a series of revolutionary changes. The Clara Mitchell Academy of Culture and Training, where every crew member would be required to undergo courses on fairness, diversity, and crisis management, led by Captain Adrian Lee. The Maya Carter Scholarship, offering opportunities for minority students to enter aviation from engineering to management. Maya, the young woman who once held her phone steady that day, now sat in the front row, her eyes brimming with tears as her name was called. The Collins Security Committee, established to ensure security staff relied on judgment and conscience rather than blind force. Officer Collins, the man who once hesitated between right and wrong, had now become a model for a new generation. Applause thundered like a storm. Employees cheered, many in tears. Clara had not only saved the company after a crisis, she had transformed it into a symbol of change. Press releases about the new strategy spread immediately after the conference. Multinational corporations sent congratulations. Headlines proclaimed, "Mitchell Aerospace, from crisis to global icon." A CEO who turned pain into power that changed an entire industry. Airlines that once mocked now scrambled to imitate, announcing similar programs in fear of being left behind. People began calling it the Mitchell Standard, a new benchmark in service. Yet in the quiet nights, when the lights of the hall faded and the applause dissolved, Clara often remembered that day. She sat alone by the window of her 50th floor office, gazing at the glowing city. She knew true power was not in billion-to-dollar contracts, but in the moment you stood firm when others tried to humiliate you. True power was not in shouting, but in the calm that made others tremble. In her private journal, Clara wrote, "That day I was underestimated, but I was not defeated. And when I stayed silent, it was not submission. It was preparation to speak 10 words that could change everything." Months later, when Clara flew to Geneva to sign a contract with the World Health Organization, she once again chose to sit in first class as an ordinary passenger. No announcement, no bodyguards, no press. A young flight attendant approached, smiling warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Mitchell. We are honored to serve you." Her eyes were sincere, without a trace of pretense. Clara returned the smile softly. In that moment, she knew her mission had taken root. And inside the aircraft cabin, 30,000 feet above the ground, one message echoed in every heart. Dignity is not something to be granted. It is a foundation that cannot be negotiated. 7 months after the incident, the world spoke Clara Mitchell's name once more, not through scandal, but at a signing ceremony inside the headquarters of the World Health Organization in Geneva. Before the cameras of hundreds of reporters, Clara placed her signature on an agreement. Mitchell Aerospace Global would become the primary carrier for medical transport, responsible for delivering medicine, equipment, and relief personnel to remote regions where commercial planes rarely land. As she stood, the flash of cameras filled the room. A journalist shouted, "Mrs. Mitchell, why would a luxury airline choose humanitarian service?" Clara paused, her gaze steady and resolute. Her voice carried through the hall. Because the sky does not belong only to the privileged. The sky must serve those fighting to survive. That answer was shared by millions overnight. It was not just a contract. It was the pivot of an empire. Mitchell Aerospace, once a symbol of luxury for billionaires, corporate leaders, and global politicians, was now sending the same planes that once served fine wine and Italian leather seats to carry vaccines, ventilators, and food supplies. On the very first mission, a Boeing 787 bearing the Mitchell logo landed in a small African village. Its passengers were not CEOs in tailored suits, but doctors in white coats with backpacks full of medicine. Villagers rushed the makeshift airstrip, clapping and cheering. A young boy clung to a doctor's arm, his eyes shining with hope. The image was broadcast worldwide. On television, a commentator said, "Clara Mitchell has transformed the airplane from a symbol of privilege into a tool for humanity." Other corporations were forced to follow. A European airline that once mocked Clara announced its own aid initiative. A global tech company launched scholarships in her name for women of color to study aerospace engineering. Harvard Business School added the Mitchell Standard to its core curriculum. A professor opened a slide showing Clara sitting calmly in that fateful VIP cabin with the caption, "True leaders don't need to shout. They make the world listen through composure." Meanwhile, Richard Langston sank into ruin. Contracts were cancelled. Partners abandoned him. From a VIP seat, he fell to a cramped rental apartment in the suburbs. Every time he stepped outside, he felt the stares, the pointing fingers. The image of him mocking Clara circulated endlessly, a stain he could never erase. Evelyn Brooks found work at a small airline in Central America, but wherever she went, colleagues whispered and passengers recognized her from the internet. She lived in regret, knowing one arrogant moment had destroyed her life. In contrast, those who chose a different path were rewarded. Officer Collins rose to Director of Security Training, teaching the next generation, never let authority silence your conscience. Maya Carter began her internship in the Diversity and Inclusion program. From a young woman trembling with a phone in her hand, she now stood confidently before auditoriums, presenting how every passenger should feel respected. Clara watched from the front row, her eyes glowing with pride. Back in her 50th floor office in New York, Clara gazed out over the glowing city. From a place where she was once disrespected, she had become a global symbol. But what fulfilled her most was not billion-dollar contracts. It was the laughter of children in distant villages as Mitchell planes landed with medicine. In an interview, Clara said, "We are given power not to build higher walls, but to open wider doors. And if one day you are in the sky, remember there are people on the ground who need you." Her words became a rallying cry across social media. Posters at international airports bore her image alongside the phrase, "The sky belongs to everyone." That night, another humanitarian flight departed from New York, carrying hundreds of boxes of vaccines to South America. Clara stood at her office window, watching the blinking lights of the plane climb into the night sky. In her heart, her mother's words from childhood echoed, "Respect yourself first, because the world will not always do it for you." Clara smiled. From insults in a VIP cabin to humanitarian skies, she had proven that calmness can crush arrogance, and that a woman once dismissed could change the world. 1 year after the VIP cabin incident, the world was no longer the same. The name Clara Mitchell was no longer tied solely to aviation, but had become a symbol of a new style of leadership. Leadership through calm, determination, and dignity. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, hundreds of CEOs, politicians, and scholars sat inside a grand hall blanketed in snow. Clara walked onto the stage, the light catching the silver strands in her hair, her small frame radiating authority. Applause erupted, not just because she was the CEO of an empire, but because she had redefined the standard of leadership. She began with a single sentence. "True power is not the privilege of sitting in the front seat. True power is the ability to ensure that everyone, in any seat, is treated with dignity." The hall fell silent. Eyes followed her every move, from oil executives to African statesmen, from Silicon Valley innovators to university professors. Clara had become the voice the entire world listened to. Following her speech, a wave of global initiatives was announced. A major US tech company launched Code with Dignity, inspired by Clara, to train underprivileged children in Detroit, the very place she grew up in programming. An Asian bank adopted the Mitchell Standard for employee training, stressing, "No one has the right to diminish a client because of appearances." Universities across Europe created courses titled Leadership and Dignity, each beginning with the moment Clara sat calmly under humiliation. The media called it the Mitchell effect, when the courageous act of one individual shifts global thinking. But not everyone was pleased. Some conservative leaders saw Clara as a threat. At a private dinner, a CEO muttered, "She's turning leadership into a moral stage. Business is profit, not fairness." Yet those whispers quickly crumbled under reality. Mitchell Aerospace's revenue had doubled, new customers rose by 40%, and trust from the community had become a competitive edge. Clara had proven that ethics and profit were not opposites. They sustained each other. She never forgot her roots. Clara returned to the Detroit neighborhood where she grew up, standing on the narrow street full of memories, the cracked walls and old houses where she once heard her mother's words. "Respect yourself first, because the world will not always do it for you." This time, she brought hundreds of scholarships and opened a training center in aviation for local youth. When she stepped onto the small stage in her old school's auditorium, children cheered. A little girl approached, her eyes glowing. "I want to fly a plane like you." Clara smiled, bent down, and replied, "You can not only fly a plane, you can own an airline if you choose." Applause thundered. In the children's eyes, Clara was not just a CEO, but proof that humble beginnings do not define the destination. The passengers who had once remained silent on that fateful flight were not the same either. One man sent a letter to the company confessing, "That day, I sat right across from you. I stayed silent, and I'm ashamed of that." Since then, I've promised myself never to stay silent in the face of injustice again. Thank you for changing me." Clara read the letter in her office, her eyes softening. It was proof that the silence she held that day had not been meaningless. It had reached far more hearts than she imagined. In South Africa, children wore shirts with the words, "The sky belongs to everyone." In Japan, students formed the Mitchell Leadership Circle. In Brazil, a group of young pilots hung Clara's portrait in their training room, treating her as the standard to follow. Clara Mitchell had surpassed the boundaries of being a CEO. She had become a cultural icon, the embodiment of strength and dignity, calm and decisiveness. One night, after a string of conferences, Clara sat alone in her hotel room in Zurich. She opened the window, the cold wind rushing in. Above, a Mitchell aerospace jet soared, its lights flickering across the sky. She asked herself, if that day I had stood up in humiliation, would I have had the chance to change the world as I have today? Then she shook her head softly. That silence, that composure in the storm, had been the key. It turned humiliation into strength, a VIP cabin into a stage, and a personal confrontation into global change. Clara closed her eyes and whispered, "Dignity is not a dream. It is reality, if we dare to defend it." And outside, the sky stretched endlessly, a reminder that her journey was far from over. 18 months after the VIP cabin incident, Clara Mitchell's name was everywhere. But as her light spread across the globe, shadows began to gather. Not everyone wanted Mitchell Aerospace Global to become the new standard. In a luxurious boardroom in London, the very people who once mocked her now sat together, their eyes sharp and cold. It was an alliance of 3 European airlines, a Middle Eastern oil conglomerate, and a North American transport giant. They called Clara a threat, not only because she had stolen VIP clients, but because she was expanding into humanitarian transport, winning multi-billion-dollar international contracts. "She's turning morality into a business tool," a German executive growled. "If we don't stop her, Mitchell Aerospace will swallow the market." Another voice cut in, low and cold. "We cannot bring her down in the skies, so we will do it on the ground." The campaign began with leaked headlines. Mitchell Aerospace accused of tax fraud. CEO Clara Mitchell accused of abusing authority in humanitarian contracts. Tabloids splashed the stories. Social media spread them like wildfire. But Clara did not flinch. At a press conference, she said only, "We are ready to open our entire audit. Light is the best cure for lies." When the results of the independent investigation were released, every accusation was baseless. Instead of collapsing, Clara's reputation soared higher, praised for transparency, resilience, and her refusal to bend under pressure. The rival alliance did not stop. They lobbied governments in several countries to ban Mitchell Aerospace from humanitarian contracts. They poured money into political campaigns, pushing the idea that a private company should not control too much of the world's medical transport. Clara knew this was no longer just an economic battle. It was an ideological war. In her 50th floor office, she met with the board. One member said anxiously, "If they win, we'll lose everything with the WHO. We'll go back to being just a luxury airline." Clara's gaze swept the room, her voice cutting like steel. "We will not retreat. Mitchell Aerospace does not exist just to serve the wealthy. We have proven that dignity is non-negotiable. Now we will prove that ethics is also a strategy. In the heat of conflict, a group of young leaders from technology, logistics, and healthcare companies stepped forward to publicly support Clara. They called her the leader of a new generation. A young CEO from Singapore declared, "Mitchell Aerospace doesn't just transport goods, they transport trust. And in a fractured world, trust is the most valuable asset of all." That support shook the rival alliance. They had not expected that a woman once humiliated in a VIP cabin would become a banner around which a generation of leaders rallied. On international television, fiery debates erupted. One side attacked Clara as an activist disguised as a businesswoman. The other defended her as the leadership model of the 21st century. In a live broadcast, when asked, "Do you think you are politicizing aviation?" Clara simply smiled and delivered a line that shook the entire hall. Aviation has never just been about flying. It is about people who gets to take off, who gets left behind, and who has the courage to open the skies for everyone. The word spread like a storm. A new hashtag was born. #Open the skies. Though strong before the public, Clara wrestled with her thoughts in private. In her high-rise apartment overlooking Manhattan, she sat by the window, flipping through old photographs, her mother's calloused hands, the nights of study under dim light. She knew this fight was no longer just her own. It was a promise to the past, a voice for all who had been dismissed. Clara whispered to herself, "If they want to turn the sky into a battlefield, then I will fight. Not for a VIP seat, but for the right of everyone to fly." At the end of Part 9, the undercurrents had not settled. The rival alliance was preparing their next strike. This time, not just fake news or lobbying. They were planning a global-scale crisis to force Clara to fall. But in her eyes, there was no fear. Only composure. The very weapon that had turned humiliation into strength, and a small VIP cabin into the beginning of a worldwide revolution. The news broke on a June morning as New York basked in early sunlight. On the giant screen inside Mitchell Aerospace's 50th floor office, red letters flashed across. "Global health crisis. Medical supply transport system paralyzed." A virus outbreak in South America was spreading faster than predicted. Millions of vaccine doses needed urgent transport, but the entire international logistics network had suddenly collapsed. Hackers had struck. Major carriers reported total shutdowns, unable to dispatch a single flight. Clara Mitchell stood before the glass wall overlooking Manhattan. Deep inside, a chilling instinct echoed. This was no accident. This was the rival alliance's final strike, turning a humanitarian crisis into a weapon to bring her down. Governments around the world flooded her with calls. The World Health Organization sent an urgent message. If shipments don't move within the next 72 hours, millions of lives are at risk. Rival airlines remained silent, dodging responsibility. Pressure fell squarely on Clara. Headlines blared, "Will Mitchell Aerospace save the world or collapse under the weight?" In an emergency board meeting, one executive cried out, "We can't carry this alone. If we fail, Mitchell Aerospace will be blamed by the entire world." Clara turned, her eyes sharp as blades. "If we don't act, millions will die. If we fail, at least we will fail for the right reason." The room fell into absolute silence. Clara ordered the full mobilization of the fleet, from luxury jets to cargo aircraft. She instructed engineers to convert VIP seats into vaccine storage compartments. Pilots, attendants, technicians, everyone was called in. "We will become the only transport network still standing," she declared, "not for profit, but for life." The first plane lifted off from New York, bound for Brazil. Maya Carter, now an operations aide, tracked the flight in real time. Inside the cabin, thousands of vaccine doses were secured in special refrigerated containers. In the cockpit, Captain Adrian Lee's steady voice crackled through the radio. "This is the most important flight of my career. We are carrying life to where it is needed most." On the ground, millions followed live broadcasts. The hashtag #Wings of Dignity swept across social media. But the rival alliance struck back. A European airline spread disinformation. Mitchell Aerospace delayed. Vaccines spoiled. Panic began to spread. Clara appeared on international television, staring directly into the camera. "Some want to sow fear. I only want to sow truth. And the truth is this: our planes are landing safely with millions of doses. Open your eyes and see." Moments later, live footage from Brazil showed children lining up, doctors administering the first vaccines. The crowd erupted in cheers, tears streaming in joy. Lies dissolved like souk. The rival alliance faced a storm of outrage. Within 3 days, Mitchell Aerospace executed more than 200 flights, delivering tens of millions of doses across continents. Not one flight was late. Not one shipment spoiled. When the final plane landed in Africa, Clara stood inside the operations center, her eyes red from exhaustion, but her smile unwavering. Staff cheered, embraced, and wept. A young engineer whispered, "We achieved what the entire world thought impossible." Clara replied softly, yet firmly enough for all to hear, "Not impossible. Only waiting for someone brave enough to try." The following week, the United Nations convened an emergency session. The Secretary General stood before the Assembly and declared, "Mitchell Aerospace has saved millions of lives, and Clara Mitchell has proven that dignity is not just a slogan, but the strongest weapon against chaos." The chamber rose in thunderous applause. Clara sat quietly, her eyes glowing with conviction. From that small VIP cabin long ago, she had traveled a journey that turned dignity into a global banner. That night, Clara sat alone by the window of headquarters, watching Mitchell jets blaze across the night sky. She remembered Evelyn's scornful glare, Langston's mocking laughter, the suffocating silence of the VIP cabin. All of it had led her here. She whispered to herself, "Some battles are not fought with weapons, but with choices. And when we choose to stand for dignity, we have already won." The sky outside stretched vast and endless, and Clara knew her journey was not yet over. For there would always be people who needed to be reminded that respect is not a privilege. It is a right that cannot be denied. Clara Mitchell's story does not end with a single flight or a moment of defiance. From an expert's perspective, what made her a symbol was not financial power, but the ability to turn humiliation into a lesson and to transform crisis into an opportunity to redefine standards. In a turbulent world of business, Clara proved that true leadership is not measured by the seat you occupy, but by how you defend dignity for yourself and for others. And that is also the message for us today. Every time you remain silent in the face of injustice, you let the chance for change slip away. But with just one decision, one action taken at the right moment, you can rewrite the entire outcome, just as Clara did. If this story made you reflect, hit like to spread the message, and subscribe so you won't miss the journeys ahead, where we continue to expose arrogance and affirm that fairness is not a privilege, but a right for all. And finally, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment with just 2 words, dignity, to declare that you too believe in this value that can never be negotiated.